Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Monteith with Frontier School Division. I'm one of the science instructional coaches, and we are bringing you an exciting live event from Churchill, Manitoba. We've been out here for the past few days. We've seen a lot of polar bears, we have seen seals, we've even seen some fox, and today we're going to talk all about experiences and practices with science and technology in the subarctic. This morning we're focusing on past practices. So that could be everything from something that was used last year to 500 years ago. We're going to start this morning with an introduction from all of our panelists, and at that point you can start to submit your questions.
Hello, I'm Matthew Bunker. I'm a school teacher locally here in Churchill.
My name is Vicki Trim. I'm a wildlife biologist for Northern Manitoba.
My name is Brett Willock. I'm a conservation officer, the district supervisor of the Polar Bear Alert Program in the Churchill District.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Bradley Hampson. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Technology and Library Services with Frontier School Division.
Hi, my name is Dr. Leanne Fishbach. I'm the Science Coordinator here at the Churchill Northern Studies Center and the Research Scientist.
Hello, I'm Stefan Peterson. I'm the Head of Conservation and Research at Assiniboine Park Zoo.
Hi, good morning. I'm Vicki Sination. I'm an Arctic ecologist and I'm based in Iqaluit in Nunavut.
And I'm Marty Ford. I'm the Area 3 Superintendent at Frontier School Division, and I have resided in Churchill for 10 years, many years ago.
Thank you, everyone. We're very excited to have you here with our program. We're going to start this morning. I think we're going to start with you, Brent. How have you used in conservation technology to help you with bear observation and protecting the town?
Part of the work of the Polar Bear Alert Program is to capture problem bears that are in or near the community. And any bear that we do capture, we would hold in our holding facility at Churchill. We have 28 holding cells, and any polar bear that is handled through our system would be ear tagged and processed, and that ear tag has a number on it that would follow that bear through its whole life. And anytime we handle that bear, we can go back into our database that we would have from the early 80s and see what that bear's history is, how long it's, how old it is, where it spends most of its time, and if we've had any problems with it in the past. So a lot of the work we do with the Polar Bear Alert Program goes back to that original database from the early 80s.
Thank you. That's great information. We'll move over to Leanne from the Study Center. In the past, what have you been able to study? And, we're talking anything from last year to 20 years ago, and how you've been involved in that in your programming here.
Yeah, so I've been working here at the Study Center for about 15 years, and one of the things that we were doing previously was working out of an older facility where we didn't have as many access to resources and things like that. So we have built this great new building that we're in now about 5 years ago. So for the Study Center, this has been a great move forward to have better facilities for researchers who are working in this area. In terms of research programs, there has been a long history of research going on in the Churchill region. Even back when the Indigenous people lived here, they were collecting natural history observations and then forward into European settlement. So a really long history of science and research here in Churchill using all kinds of different pieces of technology.
Thank you. We're going to flip the focus now. We're going to talk a little bit about education. Matthew, you've been a teacher here for quite some time. How has technology been used in the past?
When I first moved here, our internet was set up with a satellite link to the outside. Since then we moved over to the MTS as our way of getting out. The speeds have increased a little bit that way. The community itself actually was quite progressive in moving towards high-speed internet. Back in early 2000, the whole community, including the school, was on a higher speed connection than dial-up. We had a wireless internet throughout the whole community, which was kind of interesting. We were one of two communities in Canada that actually had that connection. And so the kids in our school had a decent connection out to the world at that time even. It was very interesting moving up into a northern community and find out they had a better connection in the community, southern community I moved from, was kind of interesting.
Thank you, Matthew. Again, we're going to flip our focus, and I'm going to turn our attention to Marty. Marty, your family has lived in the North for quite some time, many generations. Growing up and in your experiences, what has technology and science looked like for you?
Actually, it's quite interesting because I remember my father telling stories about when he lived up in Baker Lake, up in Nunavut. And probably about, I would say, 80 years ago, they were still, my dad was an interpreter for the Northwest Company. He was Inuit, and he would travel across the north by dog team. And at that time, he would go to all the different Hudson Bay stores, and he would interpret for the customers who were coming in to sell their furs. And, you know, traveling by dog team, living in an igloo, staying in an igloo when they would travel. So technology has come a long way in the last 80 years.
Thank you. Is that any different than your experiences when you lived here in Churchill as well?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I came up here and when I moved to Churchill, and that was in the early 80s. And at that time, we didn't have internet. I came up to work for ComAir, you know, just graduating out of high school. And at that time, when a plane would leave coming from Winnipeg, coming up to Churchill, we would get a telex. It was called. It was like a fax machine, sort of, kind of like a bit about it, like a computer. And they would tell us, you know, the plane has just left Churchill. You can expect it there in about 2.5 to 3 hours. And there's this many people on. And so we would wait, and we didn't know anything that was going on until we got this telex letting us know that the plane had left. From there, I went to work at the bank. And when I worked at the bank, people would come in at the time, and you know, they'd want to withdraw $20 from their account, and we'd take their little passbook. That people had little books that said how much money they had at that time, and we'd write minus $20, and that would be their $20 out, and we'd use a calculator to calculate how much money they had left and give them back their passbooks. And when I was still working at the bank, computers were starting to come in at that time, and we were told by a bank manager that we were going to be computerized. And I remember him telling us, well, what that means is you don't have to write in the book anymore, that the machine would update it and you put the book inside and the little typing would go across the machine and tell you how much money they had left, and you just had to put it into the machine. And the bank manager said to me, do you know, he says, in the future, we won't even have to go to the bank. People will be able to stay at home and do their banking, and I thought he was crazy. I thought there's no way that's going to happen, but we're past that. Well,
Absolutely, that seems so commonplace now that it's hard to think back to even 5 years ago when our lifestyles were completely different in regards to technology. Stefan, I'd like to give you the floor and to talk a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So in the research that I do now kind of spans everything from lab-based research to out in the field. But one of the things that we've gone away from is using radioactive isotopes to sequence data. So now, you know, if I want to know if two polar bears are related, or if certain populations of seals, how closely related they are, I do it all with chemicals that are no longer as toxic as they were in the past, and at a much faster speed. So my master's thesis was on southern flying squirrels, and all of my master's work could probably be, and that was 4 years, I probably could have been faster, but all of that data was generated, or could be generated now, in an afternoon at one of the higher throughput facilities, and just even more than that. Like, that wouldn't even scratch the output. So in terms of what we do in the lab, the technology has been just changing so fast and revealing so much more that it's really exciting, but also a little bit overwhelming.
Thank you. I'm going to get back in a moment to the radioactive isotopes. I'm particularly interested in that. Before I have you speak about that, though, I could see that we have a large virtual audience viewing our event right now, but we aren't having anybody asking questions just yet. If you are having trouble with your chat feature, please feel free to email me your questions as well, and I can get them to the folks here on the panel right away. So yes, back to radioactive isotopes. How did that work?
It was, well, to make it short, you needed isotopes to label the DNA. But in order to get the sequence, you ended up having to float a little plate with a whole bunch of little wells, so little divots in a plate, kind of like a flattened golf ball with holes. And so there would be a line for A's and T's and G's and C's, the 4 bases that we have. And so you'd have to start the reaction and take your isotope and drop it into these little wells as fast as you could go. So about halfway through, if you weren't focused, you'd hit the edge and the whole thing would sink into the water bath, and then you'd have to decontaminate everything and do it again a few days later after you'd figured it out again. So now it's put it into a thermocycler, which is a machine that just cycles through temperatures, amplify it up, either do it in-house or send it away to a facility that just cranks it out with fluorescent labels instead of radioactive labels. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think our virtual audience has stopped being shy, so I'd like to give a special shout out to John G. Stewart School in Winnipeg. We also have our folks from Louis Riel School Division in Winnipeg tuning in. We have a hello from Wisconsin, as well as St. Mary's Academy in Winnipeg. So great to have you on board, and feel free to ask your questions at any time. I would like to give you the floor, Vicki, and to talk a little bit about what you have done with your work.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so a lot of my work has been related to remote sensing, and the technologies, of course, have changed tremendously since the 70s and 60s. So when I first started doing wildlife biology a number of years ago, decades ago now, the first remote sensing images I used were aerial photographs. And sort of in the old days, that was all we had before satellites, and aircraft would fly over the countryside, literally taking a photograph every 30 seconds or so and do lines back and forth. And we would take these photographs and look at them through this a thing called the stereograph glasses, and you'd peer through those and have your photographs overlap so that you could see terrain and look at forest cover or mountainous terrain and so on. So that was quite a long time ago, and things have progressed tremendously since then. We have a number of satellites. We see them at night circulating around the Earth and taking many kinds of images now that are super high resolution or coarse resolution, and that's really changed how people can understand wildlife habitat of all types, and in particular sea ice habitat, which I've been studying with my polar bear research.
Thank you. I find your story about the stereograph interesting. When I was teaching in Cormorant, one of the courses that I taught was grade 10 geography, and that was a lesson in the textbook, and I had to go find out what this is until the new curriculum was created about 8 years ago. I'm sure I'm off in my timeline there.
Right.
So yeah, that was still in high school textbooks in Manitoba not that long ago, relatively speaking.
And there's still uses for the aerial photos because of their age. So we can look at time series and trends, and in climate change research, particularly for glaciers, people have used those old photographs to look at how glaciers have been receding around the world and in the Canadian Arctic. So while they might seem quaint, they do have their purposes, and with the current satellite imagery and geographic information, so GIS, and on your computer software, you can really look at change over time, both glaciers, forests, beaches, and so on.
Thank you, that's fantastic. So a little bit more from our virtual audience. First of all, just a reminder, when you are asking questions, let me know what school and what state or province you're from so that we can give you a shout out there. We do have a special hello to Leanne and all the folks at the Study Center from Chris Brothers, a science teacher from Cape Cod who was there for Earthwatch August 2015 Tadpole Project. And directed at you, how much snow have you had here so far this year?
Well, hello everyone. Thanks very much for the shout out. We actually haven't had a lot of snow here in Churchill yet. We have just a tiny little bit on the ground right now. That's sort of typical for this time of year. A lot of those ponds that you were wading around in, though, they're frozen over at this point in time. Not quite to the bottom yet, but the freezing process has definitely started.
Thank you. I would also like to give the floor now to you, Vicki, to speak a little bit about what you're working on.
So I work for the government of Manitoba, and basically my role would be to monitor the various wildlife populations with a major focus on large mammals. And the purpose of understanding, how healthy the populations are and how they're doing in order to more manage human use of those resources. So we need to understand, what the moose populations, how they're doing, caribou populations, polar bears, in order to mitigate any impacts of industrial development or to kind of control levels of harvest if that needs to be implemented. So when I was originally hired to work in northern Manitoba, my main focus was on endangered species and specifically boreal woodland caribou. So that's been a major focus of my work. We've done a lot of radio collaring to understand, areas that are important to boreal caribou. They're very susceptible to disturbance from human development or forest fires. So we really have to have a good understanding of what areas are important to those caribou so that we can, kind of control development in those areas and protect that critical habitat. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Vicki. I'm going to change focus again, and I'm going to give the floor to Bradley. And Bradley, we're again focusing on technology and use in education across northern and rural Manitoba. So anything that you would like to speak to or comment on in that regard?
I think some of the biggest changes, other than what we're now doing, the many things we can do with technology, is that it's gone from being an item of isolation to an item of collaboration. Today's event is a wonderful example. But in the past, for those of us those in our audience that didn't survive the past, sharing information was very difficult. You usually had to walk the media or the content from one device to another, or from one building or from one school to another. And it was far more, now it's far more focused on what we can do with the technology. Originally, when it came into the schools and education, it was just about the technology itself. It was like, look at what this can do actually, and it was really very weak academic ties or pedagogical ties. And now there's actually a real clear focus as to the role it's expected to play in education.
Good, thank you. That's valid points that you're making there. We have a greeting from Calgary St. Joseph School. Hello to everybody there. And we also have a question from that school. What other animals do we track? So again, keeping the focus on in the past. Vicki, you spoke to that a little bit. Is there anything else that any of the panelists would like to add about other animals that we track or monitor and how that used to be done?
I think there's pretty much every animal that we're interested, someone's trying to figure out a way to track them. One of the changes that we've seen from the past to currently is we're using satellite-linked collars or mechanisms instead of using VHF or UHF? VHF?
Yeah.
So in the past, you would say put a collar on a caribou, but then you'd have to go up with a helicopter or a plane to triangulate where that collar actually was. And the collars nowadays just send a signal and the data up to a satellite, and so researchers can sit at a desk and download that data. So pretty big functional change in how you can actually collect that.
Yeah, maybe I just comment on a couple other species. The same technology can also be used now on a lot of smaller animals. So for example, a wood frog, because now technology is so tiny and battery power can be made very small as well. So when you have a smaller organism like that, when you can shrink technology down, then you're able to actually start putting tags or being able to track other things. So wood frogs might be an example. Birds would be another example where recently we've been able to use very small tags that will ping cell towers So when the bird flies by a cell tower, the cell network will actually pick it up and feed that information back. So we can use satellites and radio collars and cellular technology as well. So there's lots of different ways that we can track animals. And as Stefan mentioned, lots of people are thinking about, if we don't have that piece of technology, how might we be able to track some of those creatures?
Absolutely. I think that people's minds are definitely opening up to what's possible, and have been for quite some time now, to go in that direction. Kelly Holtzman has a question for our educators, so Bradley and Matthew. Technology changes so quickly and can be quite expensive. What are some of the suggestions you have for teachers and schools to stay current?
You go first.
Just getting on and looking at what other teachers are doing in different communities is really important to do. Going in and looking how they're using technology. It's not always the brand new things out there, but new ways of using current technology as well comes into play. So different things you can do with your students with the things you have that'll catch their interest, that'll get them going on to these different areas. So I find important, especially in the North where it's not as easy to jump on every new thing. So what can you do to get them interested in the things you have and different ways of using it, getting it, and seeing what possibilities are there with it.
Okay, thank you.
I would probably come at it from another side. I agree with you. I think that those are all really good points. I think that the hardest thing is because there is so much of it. But you've got a wonderful resource right in your classroom. Student-directed learning is a wonderful concept and a wonderful practice. So inviting the kids or your learners, regardless of their age, to come and bring the technologies they're interested in and finding ways to incorporate that into instruction. And of course it can't take place over the whole unit, but there might be a lesson somewhere here or there where that technology could be used. It would engage the kids, and it gives the teacher the opportunity to see some of the newest things that are actually out there that the students are using and finding ways to apply that within their instruction.
And that's a great segue to a little promo for tomorrow morning's session, which is actually going to be hearing the student voices from our students here in Churchill. We have a group from Sisler and Louis Riel School Division that will be set up in Winnipeg, and we'll have a group of students from New York having that exact conversation, what the students and youth would like to do and see, and how they would like to bring that into our classrooms. So that would be a great session, an entire session dedicated to that question. Personally, in my experience regarding technology and how to stay current, I believe it's all about using technology to establish and maintain relationship. So it is about still connecting yourself to your educator or your teacher, to your peers around you, and to the subject matter that you're interested in as well. So any tool, it doesn't have to be the most current, as long as you're getting that relationship in there in a genuine way. Then I think you'll definitely inspire and teach yourself as well as your students. All right, we have a question from Carol Ann Swayze. How many years do you go back to track climate change and effects? I'm actually going to add on to this question before we get to the climate change. I'd like to send that question over to you, Brett, to talk about your database of past information.
Okay, how we track the polar bears' histories?
Yeah.
Okay, so every polar bear that we do handle, like I was saying earlier, has an ear tag and a lip tattoo with a corresponding number. So every time we do handle that bear, we'll take its overall body condition. We know its age from a previous capture, and we can take its overall body condition and its length, girth, and we can follow that bear's history throughout its life, and every time we capture it, we can go back and say, okay, we know this bear is such and such an age. We can look at its body condition, say whether or not it's gaining, losing, growing in length or girth, and we pass that on to Environment Canada, who can do studies on bear's body condition and maybe how trends have changed over the years with overall body condition on bears from the 80s to the 90s and into the 2000s.
Thank you. And then we'll go back to the question from Carol Ann, which is about how many years do we go back to track climate change and effects? And Leanne, is this something that you would be able to comment on?
I can start off on that. I think When we're talking about climate change, one of the important things is looking at air temperatures and how is the climate actually changing. And when we talk about climate, we usually want at least a 30-year record to sort of compare to. And so when we're looking for change, we've got this 30-year to compare to, and then we want to go back basically as far as we can in time. And you can do that using different pieces of technology. So we can actually measure air temperature, and we've been able to do that since maybe the late 1800s. So we can actually measure that air temperature and be able to compare over time how temperatures are changing. But when we go back even farther in time, we don't have those measured air temperatures. So we have to use other things that might indicate what the air temperature was doing. So we can often use tree rings, for example. Each year a tree puts down a layer of growth, and depending on how wide that ring is, we can often tell something about what the temperature or the conditions were like. We can also use ice cores. Ice is another way that we can drill down through a glacier and be able to look at the layers within the ice. We can also use things like coral or sediment records as well. So the longer the record we can use to track climate change, the better record we're going to have. Maybe someone else on the panel will actually like to comment on impacts of climate change and different species.
I think that's a very broad topic, but perhaps what we can do, if any of the other panelists want to comment on, is in the past, how have climate change studies changed? So what technologies have we used to study not just air temperature, but other climate factors?
I think I'll pick up on one of the items that Leanne mentioned, and certainly to establish the longest record. Scientists are using glacier cores from glaciers and ice caps, particularly the Greenland ice cap, because it's really the thickest and has the longest record. So if we want to cast back many thousands of years ago, then we go to these kinds of ice cores. And it just depends on the time frame and the spatial area that you want to look at. So those tree rings that you mentioned are very useful for the shorter time frame, say 100 years or so. But the ice cap cores are good for thousands and thousands of years. So it really depends on the scale that you want to look at and what kind of technology that you would like to use.
Okay.
It's much harder for animals. One of the ones that comes to mind is we can reconstruct past from whaling records of harvested species. So the whaling ships took pretty good records of how many tons of oil, and you can kind of calculate how many whales that turns into. So there's good records, Hudson's Bay records from the fur trade, but if it wasn't a harvestable species, then we don't have that good record. But we also have great record that come from indigenous peoples. So we're seeing more and more use of traditional ecological knowledge and that sort of knowledge in order to try and reconstruct how things may have looked like in the past for animals.
Thank you. Building on that, how would public teachers or teachers in the public from all across our continent have access to these records, either from former times or from Hudson Bay Company, as you mentioned? Do we have access to use in our classrooms?
Yeah, certainly on the internet there are many data sets that are available for everyone to use, and there's a great sort of the sharing of information that was mentioned earlier throughout the Arctic and through Arctic research and subarctic too. People want to share data so it's possible to understand better and to create collaborations of scientists to look at data sets and just to be bringing more brain power to the questions are really helpful. So those same data sets are available to teachers as well as students, and there are also often many fantastic summaries on certain websites that have these data sets. A great example is the National Snow and Ice Data Center website. That's a US-based organization, and if you want to find out anything about sea ice, it's all there, and beautiful summaries and graphics to be used as well.
I find that with students, I've actually taught them how to go on to Google Scholar. and look up articles through Google Scholar rather than just regular Google, because then they can get more information that is more current and scientific research.
Thank you. Those are great resources that I'm sure our teachers will appreciate. I know I will. I have another question, the famous question that we're waiting for at this time of year. So Jeff B. and the folks at John G. Stewart School in Winnipeg ask, is it dangerous to go trick-or-treating in Churchill? And what are some of the precautions kids take on Halloween? So we are going to go, again, to focus into our past as compared to today. Marty, do you have anything to comment on Halloween practices in the past? And then we'll get to Brett, who can talk about today.
Well, in the past, actually, on Halloween, we would make sure that parents were out with their kids, that kids traveled by car, they didn't walk down the streets, so parents would take them, and make sure that they followed them along the street as they were going house to house. And there was always polar bear alert out at that time, focusing around the outskirts of town to make sure that there were no polar bears coming in. I understand that things have changed quite a bit, though.
Okay, and that leaves us to you.
So this time of year, we have staff that go into the schools and do a polar bear safety presentation to all the students. It sort of keeps their minds current on the safety practices in and around the community, not only on Halloween, but any time of the year at this time of year. There could be polar bears in the community at any time of any day. So we want to make sure that it's not only Halloween that's focused on, it's all the time. But specifically on Halloween, we have our patrols starting at 3 o'clock. We have a collaboration of units from the town, from RCMP, EMS, Fire, Canadian Rangers, and Manitoba Hydro. And we have 10 units, between 10 and 12 units set up around the periphery of town, and some roving units around town, as well as a helicopter that'll fly for generally half an hour to an hour around before dark to ensure there's no polar bears in or near the community. And we'll patrol until all the trick-or-treaters are off the streets, and we have had a pretty good record of keeping bears out of town on that day.
And of course, the costume that is absolutely off limits on Halloween in Churchill.
Well, I say the polar bear, but I can pick a kid in a polar bear costume off.
Matthew, in the school, is there any buzz about Halloween from the students or concerns that students seem to have with safety?
They're excited about Halloween coming up, but they've grown up here for the most part, and it's what Halloween tradition is to them. I know my kids growing up, they loved Halloween. We went every year. We walked often for the streets near our house, and then we drove to the streets further away. But like Brett said, there's massive amounts of patrols going out. The whole community gets involved, making sure the kids are really safe, and the kids feel safe, and the parents are still wary, and you're still watching yourself. But you know that there's a lot of extra patrols going out and around, and you feel a lot safer doing that with your kids, and it's really enjoyable. The kids really are always looking forward to it.
Great, thank you for that. We have a question from Carol Ann Swayze, and I'm going to direct this to you, Vicki. How have genetic studies affected any of your research in the past?
Most of the genetic work I've been involved with has been related to caribou again. Done a little bit of genetics working with Steph and polar bears, but in relation to caribou, it's helped us differentiate the different types of caribou that exist in the province. So we have 3 different types. We have barren ground, and then we have boreal woodland, and then we have forest tundra, or we call them coastal caribou. And by using genetics, basically we started about 12 years ago. Instead of using more intrusive methods like collecting tissue or blood, we now use fecal samples or poop samples. So we go out into the field and we find areas where caribou have been loafing around and digging up lichens, and we call it cratering. And they deposit good amounts of fecal samples. So we pick those up and we send them off to a lab, and they're able to actually use the fecal samples to differentiate between the different types of caribou. And they're actually able to use them to be able to within boreal caribou, for example, in the province, we have about 15 different ranges, and they can use those samples to identify what range a caribou came from. So there's lots of good uses for that. We use it to, we have different management regimes, and depending on the type of caribou, they use it a lot for enforcement purposes. If they catch somebody potentially that poached a caribou, and they say, well, we got it from over here, an officer can identify, no, it came from over here. So we use it for enforcement and management and all different things. So it's proven to be one of the most useful tools for managing, and the least intrusive, when you compare it to actually like hands-on collaring work. Both have their benefits though. So.
Great. Anyone else have anything to add on to that? If not, we'll move on to our next question. We have Maya from grade 7. Hello, Maya, and she is from the Christian Heritage School in Brandon, Manitoba. Maya would like to know if polar bears are colorblind and what adaptations do they have to protect their eyes from the glare of ice and snow.
I don't know if we know if they're colorblind or not, but I would suspect that they're not colorblind. So in my job at the zoo, we have polar bears, and the keepers will often have different targets to train bears to, say, open their mouths so the vets can look at their mouths or do different things. And though they tend to use the same shape but different colors in that, so that makes me suspect that they can see colors. I'm not sure if there's been specific research on if it's as good as people or better, or how it compares to other species. So, but there's young scientists out there that are looking for a project in the future. There's one.
Great idea. Yes, absolutely. We have Monica Belt, the zoology class in Cordell, Oklahoma, saying a big hello to all of us here. We have a question from St. George School in Winnipeg. How long does the sea ice stay frozen so that polar bears can hunt on it? With a smiley face.
How long?
Yeah.
It really depends on where you are. So in Churchill here, I think Leanne would probably know better, but generally the bears start coming off the ice in late July and into August, but it really varies with the year. So like we mentioned earlier, air temperature really affects the amount of ice. So if it's a warmer year, the ice will break up earlier and the bears will come ashore earlier. But you know the dates better than I do. I don't live in the Churchill area.
Yeah, no, you were pretty right on there. So usually by late August, the last pieces of ice in Hudson Bay are breaking up and melting, so the bears are then forced to come ashore. They can swim, they just can't swim all day, all the time. And so they'll come onto shore, that usually starting sometime in July, and then this time of year, they're really gathering close to the coast, waiting for the ice to form. So sometimes it can be as early as mid-November, they start to move out onto the ice, or even a little bit later, depending on the air temperatures, as Vicki mentioned. But in Hudson Bay, we only have seasonal sea ice, so all the sea ice does disappear here. There are other areas in the Arctic where we still have sea ice even during the summertime, so definitely it depends on where you are.
Thank you. We have a hello from Ohio and a comment that they had a couple of visits by caribou herds on their Explore Cape North cam this summer. Is that anything that you're involved with?
Is that up here?
I believe so, Explore Cape North cam.
Yeah, so that if it's in Wapask National Park, east of Churchill here, that would be the Cape Churchill caribou herd. So those caribou are migratory group of caribou, the forest tundra caribou. So the population is estimated at about 3,000 animals, and so they spend most of their life within Wapask National Park and somewhat to the south of there. And so when they get together, they're a group calving type of caribou. So in the spring, they all migrate into the same area and position themselves along the Hudson Bay coastline in the park, and that they get together and have their calves in big groups. And the purpose of that being there's some security in numbers when it comes to predation by wolves. So they spend the summer all along the coast there where it's nice and open area, so there's lots of wind and they're free from the bugs. And then when the fall hits, they start to move south more into the tree line, and they spend the winter in the trees, and then come back spring, they head back north and start again. So, but they move in, basically they move in one big group for the most part.
Thank you.
So one of the cool technology things that we have is explore.org has put out cameras around Churchill so people can see caribou during the summer, or bears, or beluga whales. And that's opened up some pretty interesting options to get people engaged in science, engaged in looking at natural habitats that they wouldn't necessarily have access to. But
And are these cameras available 24 hours a day?
it depends on which cameras. So the one that I work the most with is actually the beluga camera during the summer. And so it does a live broadcast during high tide, during beluga season. And then we get people to watch it and then clip photos when they see beluga that we think we can tell if it's a male or female. And then we process that afterwards to look at, social structure, who's in the area. The bear cams, I think, are throughout the bear season primarily, and I'm not sure about the ones in Wapaska. They may be kind of year-round, but yeah, gives people insight into places that they wouldn't be able to necessarily be or come at all.
And just to repeat, that's explore.org?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. That's a great resource.
The Northern Lights camera in Churchill is on the Study Center building, and although it is focused looking up for Northern Lights, it's on most of the time. So that's a camera that runs a little bit more often, and often you can see the ground as well. It's a sort of bigger picture camera than maybe the one at Cape Churchill.
Fantastic, thank you. I have another question, and the question is, which animals are your top priority for research? So I'm actually going to start this with educators. So we have Bradley, Matthew, and Marty. If this applies to you, what do you see students as wanting to study as top priority? So Matthew, we'll start with you.
For me, actually probably the bears are probably on the lower end for the students, because Churchill is so known for bears that they're kind of less interested in bears themselves, but they are interested in a lot of the other animals in Churchill, and kids are more interested in some of the other wildlife for other reasons as well. Like, we have a lot of kids that are going out for a part of the Junior Rangers program, and they go and spend a lot of time out on the land, and they're not looking for bears, they're looking for other animals and being involved that way more.
I guess two perspectives. Being an infrequent privileged guest in Churchill, I've seen more of a focus on environmental for the students in the school, other than the polar bears, the trees, the plant life, and some of the other animals in the surrounding area. The schools, at least that I've had experience with outside of Churchill, yeah, polar bears are really the key interest point. There's a lot of curiosity and a lot of sometimes misinformation. So they're really eager to find out, sort the wheat from the chaff, and find out from somebody that's either been there or still lives there what's real.
And Marty, maybe some perspective within Churchill, your students here in Churchill, but also Frontier School Division, the larger picture.
Yeah, now within Frontier School Division, as Bradley mentioned, kids really love to look at the polar bears. But any of the northern animals, we have the interest in the beluga whales because they're just so darn cute, and you can go to the zoo in Winnipeg and see them. Seals, everybody's interested in seals because the seals are just such an interesting animal, being sleek, living in the cold, ice-cold waters. And the polar bear is always an interest for the kids anywhere within the province, anywhere within the world. We notice that, and again, it's something you can go to the zoo and see them in a semi-natural habitat. So really, kids are interested all the time. I notice that the younger kids are always interested in the bigger animals, and they play with teddy bears. So the idea of the polar bear makes them, and everybody makes them cute in the kids' books. So that's something that always is an interest to students.
Thank you. Same question. I'll turn that over to you at Conservation. Obviously, safety concerns are with the polar bear, but do you have any other animals that are a top priority that you're inquiring about or researching?
Right now, in the province of Manitoba, and including the north, moose is a big priority. For the longest time, again, polar bears and boreal caribou are a big concern, given that they're listed species or species at risk. But moose and barren ground caribou are probably our highest priority right now. Those are both populations, moose populations in Manitoba, generally speaking, are on the decline, and that's a really important species for local people for harvesting. And barren ground caribou as well. Most of the barren ground populations up north are on significant decline. The one population that's in Manitoba, the Kamanariak barren ground caribou herd, is still standing strong. The last survey in about 4 years ago put the population at about 245,000. Now that's down from 500,000 when it was topped out. So it's still doing well. We're planning another survey for this upcoming summer, so we'll see what happens. But again, that's a very important species for local hunters and communities in northern Manitoba and Nunavut, the Northwest Territories. So it's really important that we're on top of monitoring and managing those populations. So.
Thank you. And for our other researchers?
Yeah, we don't actually have beluga, so don't come to the Assiniboine Park Zoo looking for beluga. We have pictures of beluga, but we do have polar bears. So one of the species or pairs of species that I study quite a bit, and I study in Churchill, are ring seals and harbor seals. So we're concerned about polar bears, but really we're concerned about the whole ecosystem and how it's changing. So we have this great opportunity to look at two sister species, so two closely related species. One, the harbor seal, that's adapted to southern and temperate waters and is in the Arctic but is not super adapted. And then the ring seal, which is highly adapted to living in ice for a portion of the year. And we have some predictions going into the future as the environment changes that the temperate adapted harbor seal will do better and the ring seal adapted to the Arctic will do worse. So we're trying to build that long-term data set to watch how these different populations might be changing and what that might mean for everything from killer whales to polar bears to people that are in that same environment.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll speak for the bears then. There is, I think in Canada, but especially in Nunavut, a great interest in continuing research on polar bears to understand their ecological requirements and how they're going to respond to changing sea ice conditions. So there are still many, many questions remaining, and certainly the prey question is a huge one. Indeed, but how will the bear's behavior change in relation to changing sea ice conditions when perhaps it's very difficult to get back to their denning areas and that kind of thing? Also, in terms of reproduction, how will the bear's reproductive efforts change as maybe there isn't as much prey, survivability of the cubs once they're born, and so on. So there still remains a lot of questions for to study in terms of polar bears. So yeah, there's a lot to do yet.
Thank you. We have a question from Anne-Sophie, who is in grade 7 in St. Anne, Manitoba. Her question is, do you think polar bears will go extinct someday? So this is, again, a big question. I'm not sure who would like to tackle that, or if there's any past research that's indicating our answer toward this question.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question because we're, looking into the future and we don't know. But we can say that some polar bear populations around the world, and again, remember the polar bears are circumpolar, Russia as well, Norway, Alaska, that with changing ice conditions, life will be harder for them because that's where they get their main food. But again, there will probably a long time into the future still be some ice in the high Arctic where bears will be able to survive. So I guess within our shorter term frame, so that we can imagine in terms of our lives, hundreds, 200s of years, there'll still be polar bears somewhere. We just don't know exactly where.
I actually like turning that around and saying, you know, it's really up to us and you guys to decide what that outcome is.
Yeah.
So it's up to you.
It's a fantastic point. Thank you. We have a question. How long has everyone been doing what you're doing for? And this is, you know, a little bit different for everybody, but I'd like to add on to that question. How long have you been involved in your line of work that you're currently in? And was there anything in your K-12 schooling that brought you to where you are today in terms of science, technology, and where your interests lie? So Marty, we're going to start with you and maybe go down the panel.
Okay, well, what first brought me to Churchill, I remember as a kid looking in encyclopedias and reading about, you know, a community that they were planning on building and having everything under one roof, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, and decided that, you know, when I was old enough, I wanted to find out about Churchill. My family was up in Baker Lake, up in Nunavut, and my parents were moving back there, and I had a brother living up there, and so I came to Churchill, and it wasn't until I left Churchill that I went into education. Left Churchill and went to university. So I've been an educator for probably 25 years, and just moved, you know, to different areas. I've always worked with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities in my career, and you know, having the job when it was posted for a superintendent, and Churchill was part of the area within the school division, I thought that would be really interesting to come back and be part of the education system up in a community that I love to live in. And you know, so that's what brought me back into Churchill.
Thank you. Go ahead.
How did I get into science? Well, when I was growing up, I lived in a very rural place with a lot of forests, and I saw a lot of wildlife all the time. And when I was in high school, I decided I'd like to become a biologist, and just carried on. I had subsequent jobs after I finished my undergraduate degree, working with national parks, and again working with wildlife, which made me think, I should learn more. So I did my master's degree, and then later my PhD, which actually I just finished last year. So I guess one example is that you can continually learn. Yeah, so I just find wildlife ecology fascinating, and it's fabulous to be able to study it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Most of our students in Frontier School Division live in rural areas, forested areas. What community did you grow up in?
Yeah, so I grew up in Ontario, in central Ontario, and I grew up on a First Nations reserve called Wata. Now it used to be called Gibson, and in a very beautiful environment of lakes and rivers and so on. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a similar long history and love of science. So I think my school days journal that my mom put together, grade 2, I had got someone to write that I wanted to be a zoologist at that point. So beyond that, the path hasn't been really straight. So I've studied, you know, fleas and tarantulas and flying squirrels and polar bears and ring seals and killer whales and a little bit of everything to get me to the position at the zoo, where I get to study an even broader range of species. And then in that, and with all of kind of the different projects that I have on the go, I'm lucky enough to have organizations like Polar Bears International send me up to talk to people and really kind of share that path and the things that I'm doing to even wider audiences.
Thank you.
It's interesting question. I've been working in Arctic science for 25 years now. So through my undergraduate degree and master's and PhD, I worked in the Canadian High Arctic. So I was working on the islands that are farther north from Churchill. So when I finished, I was looking for a job, and that's how I got this job here at the study center, and I've been living here in Churchill for 15 years. And it's hard to really answer that question. I think part of it came because I grew up on a dairy farm in southern Ontario, and when I wasn't in school, I was working on the farm with my parents, and I really didn't like the summertime because you had lots of work to do, baling hay and helping harvest crops. So when someone said, hey, you can go to the Arctic for the summer, I was like, yes, I would really like to not be there baling hay. Although I don't think that's the whole reason I went. I did always like the winter time when I was a kid growing up. So that probably drew me a bit to the Arctic, and I really do have to credit my high school chemistry teacher. I went to a very small rural school, and our chemistry teacher for grade 12 was excellent. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do to go to school, my dad sort of said, well, you really like science, maybe you should go for science. And she was very influential in helping me to decide that I wanted to be a geochemist. So contrary to some of the other people, I don't work on wildlife. I actually work on the small molecules, nutrients in the wetlands here in Churchill, and I really credit her with sort of pushing me in that direction to study chemistry in university.
Great, thank you. Bradley?
I've been with Frontier School Division and in education, involved in educational technology for 10 years, but my career as a technologist has spanned about 35 years. I've always been involved in technology in some form or other. I've got several professional certifications. I've got a master's in business administration. So business technology initially kind of took me in that direction. I've always believed that probably one of the greatest assets or the greatest things in technology reach for is collaboration. And collaboration is the stuff of learning. That's people getting together and sharing, just as we are here or any other environment. So I've always been kind of involved with people that way, even from a very early age. So I've got stories I could tell as well, but they're not half as interesting. So I'll pass on them.
Okay, thank you.
I grew up in a farming community in Saskatchewan. I always spent lots of time outdoors, and I wanted to have a job that took me into a field like that, where I worked with animals or worked in the outdoors a lot. And similar to Stefan, I had a book when I was growing up. My mom wrote in there, I think when I was 5 or 6, that I was going to be either a conservation officer or a veterinarian. And number one was conservation officer, and here I am. So I started with the department in 2005, and I've been in my current role here since 2012, fall of 2012. What brought me to the Arctic? I guess an opportunity arose for me to move from the district I was working in central Manitoba, in Norway House, and I took it, and I'm happy that I did, because it's a very rare opportunity for somebody in my position to work on polar bears so closely, hands-on work, and I really enjoy what I do.
Thank you. Did you enjoy it, having to wake up so late last night with
I was
everything
actually
that
on
was
patrol
happening?
already when I found that bear. It was good.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So I grew up in Winnipeg, and I spent all my summers growing up in the outdoors as well. And going through school, I wasn't so much a fan of science, but I was all about math, so it's what I enjoyed, it's what I excelled at. And so when I went into university, I got my first degree in math, so I majored in calculus and minored in applied math, so I got called a math geek more than once, but then I switched gears into natural resources, and so now I'm using them both. I'm very lucky, I've got a great job, so if anybody ever bugs you for being a math geek or something, you could end up with a really nice job like I have. I'm very lucky. So, but I started working for the province of Manitoba seasonally in 1998, working with the fire program, and then I got on working full-time with wildlife in 2001. I started as a technician working out of the PAW, Manitoba for about 7 years, and then now I'm working as a biologist out of Thompson. So yeah, it's a great job, strongly recommended.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I've been a teacher for just over 20 years. I've been up here since '98. It's kind of a embarrassing story why I came up here. Connecting back to my childhood, our school came up to Churchill. Grade 6 class got to come up to Churchill on a special trip, and I was all excited. The grade 6 class before us got to go, And I was looking forward, grade 6, I get to go up to Churchill. I'm going to be so excited to go up to Churchill. I got to grade 6, grade 5's got to go. So I was like, oh, I don't get to go to Churchill. Several years into my teaching already, my wife's brother was up here with his family for many years, and they kept on calling us, come on up to Churchill, come on up to Churchill, you'll love it, come up to Churchill. And I was like, at the back of my mind, I missed that opportunity to move up to go and see Churchill when I was a child. I really want to go. Okay, so we came up, we were planning on being here a couple of years. It's 18 years later now. We love the community, we fell in love with the community, and it's our home. This is where we are. So.
Thank you, that's fantastic. I definitely see a common trend in all of our panelists, including myself. So I taught in Cormorant, Manitoba for 10 years, and this is my 4th year in a consulting position. And the common trend with myself and the panelists is that we love what we do, and we probably all think we have the best job in the world. So definitely following your interests and following where your heart lies and is a guarantee that you will like what you end up with. We do have a question from Macaulay in the 12th grade from Cordell High School, and asking which animal has been the most interesting to track. Again, I'll open that up a little bit to ask, do you also have any interesting stories coming from your land-based work? I see some giggling already, so I know there's some good ones.
I don't usually use the data, but I've been pretty fortunate in being involved in some projects that were tagging animals. So in 2009, I was with a team that went up to the north end of Baffin Island and worked out of a community named Arctic Bay. And that team, it was quite a large team, and we were putting tags on narwhal and bowhead whales. There were some people doing bowhead whale work, and killer whales in the Arctic. And it was kind of one of those perfect Arctic field seasons that don't happen every year, where we were able to catch narwhal, so I got to help hold a narwhal while the tag was being put on, which was pretty amazing. They have really stinky breath, but it's still worth it. I was able to help tag one of the first killer whales that were tagged in the Eastern Arctic, and it was just an amazing, amazing experience. The data then goes to other researchers, but I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add on to that?
Yeah, certainly working on polar bears is really fascinating when you do the capture work and put the collars on and measure them up and being so close to them. I'm sure Brett knows this, but they are a fabulous animal, and their fur is just amazingly thick. And it's not surprising that they really like the cold. But earlier in my career, I studied Massasauga rattlesnakes and eastern fox snakes when I first started working with Parks Canada in Ontario. And we were experimenting at that time with different kinds of transmitters, and these were VHFs, so you'd have to run around following them. And it was just super fascinating. So many wildlife species are able to orient in their environment and navigate. So these species that we were tracking, they're also a species of special concern. Some are endangered even now, but they would start from their places where they hibernate, their hibernacula. In spring they'd come out and they'd travel all around these islands. I was working in an island park. Some would swim across between islands, but in the end of the fall, it was fascinating. They'd find their way back to the place that they hibernated, or very close to it. So these creatures that are very low to the ground, they can not see, they would travel tens and tens of kilometers and come back to that spot. So this great ability to navigate and orient in the environment. And snakes have it, frogs and toads have it, and polar bears too, because the bears of Churchill come back to Churchill. And it's a fabulous thing, and we don't understand it fully, of course.
Thank you. Okay, anyone have anything to add on to that question? Okay, we have a question greetings, first of all, from Clover Garden School in North Carolina. What are the most serious current environmental issues that you're dealing with today? Considering our topic that we are talking about past experiences for this session, I would like to do a starter that, 10, 20 years ago, what were the first signs of environmental issues that were coming up that you noticed in your research? And then we can answer the other half of that question this afternoon about what's happening with that today. So again, the question is, in previous years, what were the first signs coming up about environmental issues that may be occurring?
One of the, I don't have data for this, but one of the interesting things about working in the Arctic is we have this amazing variability in environmental conditions. So we have, light ice years, heavy ice years, cold winters. It's quite variable. So it's really, often it's the long-term trend that makes us realize that something is going on. Not, I come up next year and it's a really, heavy ice year. It's not going to be the signal that ice is coming back or, something's been reversed. So I don't think and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think for a lot of researchers it was it's a completely different season this year compared to the next. It's a long-term trend, or, I was here in the 80s and now I'm here in the 2000s, and we see these big, long pieces. It's not always, erosion taking away the banks of beaches or things like that. Sometimes it is, but often it's not so dramatic as that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think to tie that to technology is one of the difficulties when we're looking at these long-term trends is we have to use different ways to try to look at environments or to look at change over time. And Vicki gave a really great example of starting with air photos, and now we have satellite technologies and different ways that we can do remote sensing. So being able to integrate all of those different pieces of technology that we've used over time, and also with traditional knowledge, to integrate those together to put together a picture of how the environment and how the climate is changing.
Thank you. Good. Okay, next question. We have Satvik from St. George School in Winnipeg. How many polar bears are being followed using tracking collars?
Yeah,
So
different organizations are putting collars in your tags out, so yeah, it's hard to guess at this moment.
So I think maybe in Hudson Bay, there's maybe, just to give a sense, there's maybe between 10 and 15 collars. Different. There are different researchers who have different collars out. Some of them are tracked by World Wildlife Fund, and so you can find, I think they have 5 or 6 on their website where you can look up. But there are other populations of polar bears that also have collars on, so I don't have as Vicki mentioned, a good number per se.
Okay, thank you. A question going towards you, Brett. Grade 10 students from St. Mary's, Winnipeg. What role does the RCMP play with the polar bear safety programming?
Well, the RCMP, they also have the Polar Bear Alert phone line in their office. So if we're on a call and we're swamped with polar bears around town, they often will come in and give us a hand with hazing polar bears away from the community. Like I said, they are helping us out on the Halloween patrol. They have 2 units that will be roping the community, and they're doing their own patrols, but they're also keeping an eye out for polar bears and keeping the town safe that way.
Thank you. We have a comment from Christine Brothers. She states that we have a polar bear costume at our school. Every Wednesday morning, a student gets dressed up in the costume and gives an environmental tip of the week on our school TV station. So, Christine, I would like you to email me how I can access your tip of the week in the polar bear costumes, and I would like to see that. That sounds fantastic. Annette Rayner, Sylvie from St. George School in Winnipeg, is asking about animal attacks. So that's a little bit off topic from what we're talking about this morning, but I'd be happy to, if you want to email me that question, then we can discuss that a little bit further at a later time. We have Joy from John G. Stewart School in Winnipeg. As the planet warms, are polar bears starting to mate with grizzly bears, and what challenges would this new breed pose? Now, I'm particularly interested in that because I have heard of the Pizzly or the Growler bear. So, would anybody like to speak about that?
I keep jumping in. But
No, it's fine. Yeah, well, sure, I'll just say a couple things and you can jump in. Yeah, so certainly there have been instances, and really over the past 5 years or so, that people have been usually hunting when they're out. People are out hunting polar bears, and they'll shoot a bear, up in the high Arctic, so on Banks Island or something like that, really far away, and they'll shoot a bear and it'll look unusual, and they'll send out the genetics and they'll find out that it's a hybrid. So how does this happen? I guess that's the big question then. And people postulate that the male bears are coming onto the sea ice in the spring and looking for a bear to mate with, and if they come across a female and she's receptive, then the mating occurs. So this is related to sea ice, and where the distribution of sea ice is continuous, so the bears can get out and be together, which is the tricky part. Because grizzly bears hibernate,
yeah.
and polar bears don't. So that male bear has to be out there early enough to interact with the female.
Yeah. It's a really interesting problem, and there's been lots of research on hybridization and how changes in climate and ranges will make it easier or increase the rates of hybridization. So right now in the Canadian Arctic, we've seen grizzly polar bear hybrids kind of in Banks Island, kind of Western Arctic. We've kind of been interested around Churchill because we're starting to at least see more grizzly bears. So we see grizzly bears, polar bears, and black bears within the same area. So we think, well, will that set up the same conditions that we might see hybrids here? There was a bear that was harvested north in Arviat, so in Nunavut, that looked really a lot like a hybrid bear, but then when the genetics were done, it turned out it was a blonde grizzly bear. So all of the researchers interested in hybridization got excited, and and then it didn't turn out to be. But the hybridization question is something that we look at in lots of species that are closely related species whose ranges might have been more separate than they currently are. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question from grade 10 in St. Mary's in Winnipeg. How do visiting scientists collaborate with Indigenous peoples to gather information? Again, I'd like to gear that question towards past tense and, over the past 5 years, 50 years, 100 years. And then we'll talk about how that's done today, this afternoon. So going in past practices, are there collaborations, and how has this been done?
I feel like, so pastas probably predates me, but if we're reading the old gray literature related to polar bear research, there was a lot more scientists spending a lot more time in the communities in the north. And I feel like for a while there, it kind of moved away from that. So if we look in the past, researchers would be in communities, would be out there for several years. I don't necessarily think they always got credit for the information or gave credit for the information. You read the acknowledgement sections, and there wouldn't necessarily be authors on the gray literature, but in the acknowledgement section, you could tell that basically those researchers were relying on the communities and the hunters that they were with for keeping them alive, telling them the best places to do different research. So I think it's changed over time. I think we're moving towards a place where there's much more involvement on a different level, but yeah, so maybe you've worked
Yeah.
specifically collecting information.
Yeah, I talked about this a bit at the International Bear Conference in Anchorage. So you have to think back. So in the 50s, when people were starting to do polar bear research, more research scientists in Canada, the US is a bit different. You have to think about access. So technology has changed the relationship of research scientists in the polar bear field, and I'm sure every other field too, especially in the Arctic, with indigenous people that live there and connecting with traditional knowledge, because in the old days you would fly up and you would stay there and you would work with the hunters and elders in the community, again, to show you where to go and how to find whatever species that you're working with, and you would do your work together. You wouldn't bring a giant field team up with you from the south. You would be yourself, maybe one other person, and then you'd work with the people in that region. So there was a closer, I guess, connection and with researchers and people on the land, and the information, it wasn't shared in this structured way that I think we're kind of evolving to right now, but more as an everyday activity, just as I guess people on the land would be sharing their knowledge with their family and their children. So that has changed because we can now fly up every day, and we have all sorts of other technology that we can apply to the wildlife to track them remotely and so on. So there is less reliance on the people that are there to help, but and that's reduced, I think, the amount of integration of traditional knowledge with scientific thought. But that's evolving now. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to actually ask that question to you as well, Marty. We do have a language and culture department in Frontier School Division, and how that's working in an educational sense.
How is the language and culture program
Yeah,
working in
and
an educational
consulting
sense?
with Indigenous peoples and.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's very important that we remember the history of our local communities, and we remember the history of Indigenous peoples, because that history and the science of living in the North and living on the land has been around for thousands of years. And if we don't look to the Indigenous people and ask them about the interaction between living within the environment and acknowledge the knowledge they have, there's a lot of wasted time that goes into the research that people are doing. Local people know their histories. They've watched the animals, they've watched the insects, they've watched what happens within the environment, and they know without having, it's an oral history. It hasn't been written down, but the science is no different. It's very technology based within their own community. With how do you live in a sustainable environment, coexist with the animals and the environment that you're in. You built igloos to survive the cold. You built teepees to survive the winds, and all of that was done with from a scientific basis. The sustainability, using animals and all parts of the animal. You would use the stomach as a bag to carry water and hold water. You would use the intestines as sinew for sewing your clothing together, and you would use the fur for the clothing. Bones were utilized as tools. The meat was eaten. And so all of that local history, all of that local knowledge, they watched and knew what kind of parasites were around. They knew what was affecting the animals. And, it's when we're teaching, we have to make sure that we are acknowledging and preserving the culture and the traditions that have been around for centuries.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left, and I have a few short questions, so we'll do a couple of short answer questions for you before we wrap up this session. First of all, grade 10 St. Mary's from Winnipeg, what are the greatest changes you are seeing in the ecosystem? So again, this is a very, a question that we could spend a whole session on, but in short answer, what would be the greatest changes you see in the ecosystem during your studies?
I think this should be you.
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I work on a lot of the very shallow tundra ponds that you can find here. Churchill's located at the very northern end of the Hudson Bay lowlands, so it's a large wetland system that runs all the way up to Churchill, down along the coast of Hudson Bay and around James Bay as well. About 20 to 50% of the terrestrial landscape is covered by a lot of these shallow wetlands. So one of the changes that I've been noticing here is two things around these ponds. In the summer, when it's warmer out, and if we do get less rainfall, a lot of these shallow tundra ponds start to evaporate, and they used to dry sometimes, but now they're drying earlier, maybe even into July or early July. So when your wetland doesn't have water in it anymore, it's kind of a challenge for the species that live in that particular habitat. They're no longer able to survive. Now, not every wetland is drying, so maybe 20% of them might be drying. That's definitely one change that I've noticed in the system. Also is the sea ice, which is the other big example here, is that the sea ice, the time that we have sea ice on Hudson Bay is getting shorter and shorter. So the ice is forming later in the fall, but it's also breaking up earlier in the springtime. So we're losing ice on both ends of the spectrum. So in terms of on the land and then also in the marine environment, I would say those are the two big changes that are happening here.
Thank you. Anyone like to add on to that?
I guess even though we're concerned about ecosystems, I feel like a lot of us are looking at pieces of those ecosystems. So for the ring seals and harbor seals, we're seeing increases in harbor seals, but we're not always able to have the data for the whole ecosystem to understand fully why that's the case. So we know we have this trend in sea ice. I'm seeing more and more harbor seals compared to in the late 90s. Even over the past few years, we see more harbor seals every year. So that could be a few things. It could be changes in the productivity related to less sea ice cover. It could be lower predation because polar bears aren't as effective. It could be that they used to be hanging out at a different place, and now Churchill's the place to be for all of us, including harbor seals. So we're still kind of we're still at a place where it's like, okay, we need to find all the pieces of the puzzle to tie the trends in the species that we're looking at to the trends that we see in the environmental variables and the ecosystem as a whole. But every year, I think more people get excited about doing Arctic research and Hudson's Bay research. So hopefully we'll have more and more information to kind of build that picture of the whole ecosystem.
Thank you. We have a question from Ivy, St. George School in Winnipeg, in grade 7. What animals around Churchill are the most threatening to researchers? And I'm going to amend that question slightly. Aside from polar bears.
Mosquitoes.
Okay.
No, black flies.
We have a question from Red Bank Catholic High School in New Jersey. Are there any Earthwatch expeditions currently in your area?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. So I am the lead principal investigator or the lead scientist for the climate change at the Arctic's Edge research program that's offered through Earthwatch Institute. And we've been doing that project here since 1999. And we do 9 teams a year here. And we have one team that's just dedicated to teenagers. So you can come to that particular team. The other teams are more built for adults, but there's also 2 teacher teams that come sponsored, so you can contact Earthwatch about those. And there's some in summertime, there's some in the wintertime, and there's also a couple in the fall looking at tree line and permafrost, wetlands, and we're working with Stefan to perhaps build a new team around beluga whales as well.
Fantastic, thank you. A question from St. Mary's in Winnipeg. With the change from VHS transmitters to satellite-linked tech, what are you now able to work on more than in the past?
Yeah, many species. Because the limitation of VHF telemetry was that you actually had to go and look for the animal so you could hear the beep of the transmitter and then triangulate as you were explaining. So you would need towers. They were used here. You'd have to have an aircraft, so you'd be flying all around looking for your species. Or like when I was studying those snakes, you'd have to run around through the bush and boat around, just literally searching and climbing on the highest hill or a tree just to get a good signal. So yeah, satellite linked tags and collars are a huge change.
Yeah. Definitely changes the number of animals you can track. So one of my field jobs was looking at porcupine in northern Labrador, and so every day in the winter you get up on your skidoo and you zip out, and then you just try and triangulate as many porcupine as you could during the day. But if weather conditions were bad, or if one porcupine that you were trying to track decided to booter over a hill or away, then you might spend half a day trying to relocate that one animal. And so if all of the GPS collars are just getting signals and sending that information up, you can have much finer resolution. So every second, every 10 seconds, every minute, you can have lots of data being communicated instead of one poor grad student usually trying to find 7 flying squirrels in the middle of the night, or things like that.
Thank you. And I think that is going to lead us to our last question for this session. Sylvie from St. George School in Winnipeg. What is the longest amount of time that a particular animal has been tracked? So how far back does our data go?
The one that comes to mind isn't the longest. Well, you probably have lots and lots of data.
Yeah, some of the older polar bears that we've tracked through our database have been 24 plus years. It's interesting when we do find a dead polar bear on the coast, or a bear that we handle that's a really old bear that we can obviously see, we can track that number back and see that this bear was handled first as a koi or a cub of the year in 1987 or 1988, and we can see that that's an extent of the age for that particular bear. So, or we could figure out when that bear, if we knew when that bear died, we could look at its age when it died and see that would be the extent of age for a male polar bear, and that's really interesting information that we could find out from that.
For you?
Well, we had one caribou that we had collared multiple times. So this was going back to when we used to use VHF collars, and prior to collars having an automatic drop-off mechanism. So now collars, they just have a timer and it breaks the belting on the collar and the collar falls off. But back in the day, we had to, an animal was either left with the collar, which we didn't like to do, or we'd have to recapture the animal to take the collar off. So we had this animal collared quite a few times. Every time we recaptured her, we just put on another collar. So the first collar went on when she was 2 years old, and she ended up actually being harvested or shot when she was 12 years later. So she had a collar on her until she was 14, which is quite old for a caribou in the wild. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I guess one other method, that isn't collars exactly, but polar bears also receive ear tags and lip tags, and through the harvest data in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, it's also possible to get sort of snapshots of the age of a bear and the distances traveled, because bears are hunted, and when they are, the hunters report their kill, they need to report the lip tag number or the ear tag number. And a lot of the bears that were handled back in the 60s, which is a long time ago, would be dead by now. But through the harvest records, you can look back and see what the age of the bears and what they did a little bit.
Thank you. Anything else to add? Okay, if not, we'll wrap up this morning's session. So thank you for all of your participation. Before we sign out of this session, I'd like to remind you that our afternoon is all about a similar topic, science and technology in the subarctic, but where that leads us today. So current educational practices, current research that's happening, and looking into the future. At this point, I'd like to thank our technology helpers. We have 2 of our students from Duke of Marlborough School that are helping with our technology. We also have Bradley, Chris, and Jeff who are making this all happen for us. And of course, everybody here at the Study Center who has lent us their space and their expertise in making all of this happen. A big thank you to all of our panelists. This was a great discussion, and we'll continue that in a little while this afternoon. Thank you.